All right, so we're back.
What do we got today?
I got a little TikTok video I want to play.
All right,
So-
play it.
Let's just watch it quick, and then we can see what we want to say.
All right.
That's the problem. The James Webb Space Telescope is upsetting the apple cart. All of a sudden, we realize that we may have to rewrite all the textbooks about the beginning of the universe. Now, it takes many billions of years to create a galaxy, like the Milky Way galaxy, with 100 billion stars, many billions of years old. But the James Webb Telescope has identified 6 galaxies that exist half a billion years after the Big Bang that are up to 10 times bigger than the Milky Way galaxy. That shouldn't happen. There should not be primordial galaxies that are bigger than the Milky Way galaxy that are only half a billion years old. Something is wrong. We may have to revise our theory of the creation of the universe.
Okay.
I like that last line. We may have to revise our theory about the creation of the universe. And part of so I just want to start, like, cosmology generally just fascinates me.
Okay.
And in part because, there's a lot of math involved, because in part because there's, you've got Einstein, or, you've got Hawking, or all these different people that are trying to make sense of all this. And it's this attempt to use reason and use our brains that God's given us, that I got to somehow figure out a way that this all makes sense.
Is this where we say, though, at the beginning of this podcast, is it John Cleese that said astronomy is much more fun if you're not an astronomer? Who said that?
I can't remember, but yeah.
So we're not astronomers, and we're not going to, just at the beginning of this podcast. But yeah, it is fascinating.
That is a good point, though. No,
It is fascinating, but part of me loves, I can't ever say this guy's name. I've seen him before. He's a very famous scientist. Is it Michio Kaku? Or
it's something like that. Yeah, I can't remember now either, but yes.
Anyway, he's a smart cat, and there's a part of me that loves that last line. We may have to revise our theory, because in some sense, that is actually science acting like science, because everything's a theory, and it will have to be.
What's the point that you admit that you're wrong and the sun doesn't revolve around the earth?
Right. Yeah. And your
we
willingness,
had it wrong, and say, Galileo looked and figured it out, and yes.
And your willingness to be humble enough to say, well, we're wrong. We'll just have to revise that. That's not science. Just because I worry, America's not really a scientific nation. We think we are. We're not. We're technocratic. So we don't know how our microwave works. We just need it to work. You know what I mean? Like, we're that people. And, like, you'll be on a subway in Manhattan somewhere, and you'll be with your iPhone, and you don't know how to do something, and some German who's there for a visit will see you cussing at your iPhone, and he'll go, oh, no, what you do is you just go in here to features, and he knows more about your iPhone than you do, right?
It makes me think of Nate Bargatze when he talks about being the worst time travel ever. Is Nate Bargatze? He
Yeah.
talks about going back like 100 years, and he's talking about all the future inventions, but he's so dumb he doesn't know how to explain it.
He doesn't know how to explain
so
it.
nobody will believe he's from the future,
Right.
because, we have cell phones. You're like, well, how do they work? I don't know.
They just work. And so Nate is really good at self-deprecating humor, and he likes to talk about himself like he's stupid. But of course, he's not stupid, right?
Yeah.
That's the joke. But he is hitting the nail on the head about American culture, because he talks about culture for a living, because he's a comic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he's sitting there hitting the nail on the head with American culture. We are technocratic, and we don't know how our stuff works. We just need it to work, okay? So for people who don't know this about science, this isn't science failing when they say, oh, the James Webb Telescope, it's going to make us have to rewrite the textbooks.
We're able to look further in the universe, and it messed up our theories.
Yeah, Dr. Kaku is smiling. The reason he's smiling is because this is what science is supposed to do.
Now I've got a bunch of stuff I can dive into to try to figure out and make sense of.
Right, which then in 50 more years we'll go, nope, that was wrong too. You know what I mean? And it, what always tickles me, though, is that even though that is science acting like science, it is another example of why, when somebody comes out with a medical theory or a theory about the universe or whatever it is.
It could be a theory about behavior in sociology. It could be...
Or psychology,
yeah.
even. A theory about behavior from a psychological standpoint. The reason that I typically take those and I go, well, this is kind of where it's at, but like, you know,
Give it a minute.
give it a minute. It's because it's going to change in a minute, and not. This is going to tick people off, but I don't care. This is a podcast. I'm not in the pulpit. This is just how my brain works.
I think you should just tell us what you're thinking.
So, COVID, and everybody was like this and that, and everybody had a theory, and they were like, well, we shouldn't sing in church, or we should wear masks, or we should 6 feet. What was 6 feet? That was at a White House meeting, and everybody's like, well, what can we tell people? They don't know what a meter is, and somebody's like 6 feet, because everybody thinks they know what 6 feet is. You know, it's just so silly. Like, give it a minute. Back in the days of the plague doctors walked around with herbs in a beak and a mask because they thought that the plague was spread by noxious fumes. Like,
And is it also true that part of some of, like, you know, the plague being carried by fleas who are on mice or rats or other things, and then some women that might have cats in their house, and then the cats would eat the mice and they wouldn't get the plague, but then they'd think that they're witches because they didn't get the plague?
and then burn them. You know,
You know, I mean, like I've heard stuff about like that. Like, well, you know, clearly that's not scientifically accurate, but
No.
it was the prevailing theory at the time. And
yeah. And so what you have to understand about science is that it fundamentally is not magic. And there are too many people who talk about science today in hushed tones, like it's religion for people. It is religion for people. It's like some of these scientists like Kaku, they become the new high priest of a whatever religion, because it's like hushed tones, like, well, according to science. No, it's according to human theory, and we call it science.
Well, and I think especially if you're talking cosmology, it becomes very religious in the sense of you're trying to get to like an existential understanding of the theory of everything about how this all makes sense and why the world exists and how the world came into being and things that are...
And there are plenty of people who want to go at that enterprise. Like, where did everything come from? Frankly, from this standpoint, I don't want to read it out of a book like the Bible and say, well, that's it. Because there's no way that could possibly be true. And then they go, let me give you a scenario. The Big Bang. And then billions and billions of years. Because if you just add more years to it, then it sounds plausible.
Well, I've heard with this James Webb stuff, some people saying, okay, well, maybe the universe isn't actually 13.8 billion years old. Maybe it's actually like 25.6 or something, or whatever the number is. Like maybe we're just wrong about the length till the Big Bang.
Yeah. Well,
And
there's also some experiments right now that might be, and this is really early, might be calling into question how we mark time anyway. Because time is relative. We know this from Einstein's theories, or we think we know it.
Remind me, I
We
want to go
think
into
we know
another.
it.
I think I know where
We're
you're
not going to
going
go into it because it's so early. I don't want to be on record as saying that I believe something that could be completely wrong. But time might actually arise, guys and gals, as a function of reality. It may not be constituent of reality itself. Don't worry about any of that. What I'm saying, though, is that, yeah, we could be wrong about time because we could be wrong about time.
Yeah.
Not because we're marking it wrong, but because we're wrong about what time fundamentally is.
Well, let me use even an example when you're saying about, you know, the idea of we're trying to make, you know, is humans' effort to try to make sense of all of this.
Yeah.
So Edwin Hubble in the 1920s, you know, and a bunch of how we got to the Big Bang, how we even got to, you know, this idea of galaxy formation and how long it should take. My understanding goes back to Edwin Hubble. And again, I'm not a cosmologist. I'm not an expert on any of this, so I'm just going to kind of talk of what I think I know, and if I'm wrong, forgive me, and everything else. But,
Right.
but you know, Hubble's law is this basic idea that he's looking at the galaxies in the universe, and he's not even looking that far. This is the 1920s. We can look certainly significantly farther with the James Webb telescope than he could. But he's observing, you know, basically a proportional understanding of velocity and distance.
Well, he's observing redshift.
Yes.
That's what he's observing.
But within that also has kind of a fundamental understanding of what life is and how life should have come to be. And this is kind of a materialistic worldview about how things are. So he's looking for things in within already a certain lens to try to then confirm what he thinks he already knows.
Well, that's what I'm trying to say when I
Yeah.
say when scientists just add billions of years to something, it makes it suddenly plausible to people. Whether that's cosmology or it's a theory of evolution, like over billions of years we evolved from a single-celled organism into Homo sapiens sapiens. Because if you just throw more years at it, for some reason, people think that that's more plausible because then it's like super slow change.
Or it's so abstract that I can't really understand it, so it must make sense.
Yeah, either
Yeah.
one. But both of those views are definitely, whether you're talking about cosmology or something like the theory of evolution, it is materialistic.
Yes.
It is materialistic. Which is why then when something happens that looks like, well, maybe God made it.
Maybe we need to rewrite all the textbooks about our theory of the creation of the universe.
It's like, well, maybe we're doing this wrong. Well, and I try not to laugh as a theologian. I'm like, of course you're doing it wrong. But be careful. Here's where I think a lot of theologians would go wrong in the response. It would be, well, of course you're wrong because God made it and the earth is only 6,000 years old. Maybe it's only 6,000 years old. There are gaps in the record that even we have from Genesis, and there are plenty of fundamentalists who don't want to admit that.
Well,
but there are gaps in that timeline.
Even if when you define what year the exile to Babylon happened and how far you're going back, and you're looking at the genealogy and like what year was, did Adam and Eve leave the garden? Was it 4004 BC or was it, and there's not even consensus there. Is your point?
Yeah. So just to for our fundamentalist friends, I love y'all. Jesus loves y'all. You're overplaying your hand is all I'm saying. You're overplaying your hand.
But explain why, because I think I know where you're going with that. But
the Bible is the accurate record of what God did. Okay? It is the accurate record of what God did.
And he's giving us what we need to know to understand about who he is.
And who we are to each other, and who we are to creation, what creation is to us, and what we all are to God, and yes, all those things.
But he's not giving it to give us a scientific
It's not a scientific
textbook.
It's not a scientific textbook. It's not.
It's not to say, here's how light came into being when I said, let there be light. It was just that I said it and it happened.
Right. But then, so what the theologians want to say when we're at our best to the scientists when they're at their best is we want to tell them it's not just a materialistic, mechanistic system that you're observing. The spiritual world exists, God exists, and God made it. So of course you're wrong about your tick-tock on a clock time. You're wrong. Because time isn't what you think it is. Because God is eternal and he's outside the system. Even if you don't argue over a text that they don't find authoritative, like Genesis,
Yep.
a good theologian doesn't need Genesis to make that argument. A good theologian does not even need Genesis to make that argument. Because we don't have to argue over texts that you don't find authoritative for me to tell you that if you're looking at the world from a mechanistic, materialistic standpoint, that all there is matter and atoms
Quarks and atoms and everything else, yeah.
You're doing it wrong. That's what a theologian at our best wants to say to a physicist at their best.
Mm-hmm.
And what the theologians do wrong when we're at our worst is we say, the earth is the center of the universe. Harumph, 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 And what the physicists do wrong at their worst is that they say, you're crazy for reading that text in Genesis, for example, that we don't find authoritative, and finding that in there you're getting real authoritative answers to where it all came from. When they're at their worst, they accuse us of superstition, and when we're at our worst, we claim that we can tell you how light came into being instead of that it came into being when God spoke.
Yep.
We don't do the same job. Theologians are fundamentally a different animal than the physicists, and yet the more you go into physics, the more there's overlap, because if you scratch the surface of physics, it'll make you an atheist. But if you dive deep into the math, you will find God. You won't be able to miss him.
I mean, even
because he's everywhere.
Didn't even Einstein come to this point a little bit? I don't know that he became a believer in Jesus necessarily, but the further he dug, yeah.
But he found that there is a God, which is just Romans. Oh, he's spending so much time in Romans lately. It's just Romans chapter 1. Paul said, look, unless you're stupid, you ought to be able to look at creation and at least know that there is a God. So, no, Einstein didn't come to faith in Jesus Christ, but he did come to a place where he was like, yeah, but there's a God. Like, it's clear, right? You can't miss it if you dive deep enough.
Well, and so here's an example of where my limited understanding of physics and cosmology and everything else, but where my brain kind of tries to go there.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go back to Hubble and redshift.
Right.
Again, the further a galaxy is away from us,
Mm-hmm.
the faster it's moving. And it's moving faster because the light shifts to the red end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And
so if you don't understand, yeah, that's a good explanation. Also, from experience, if you don't understand redshift, you've sat at a light when a train was going by and they were blowing their horn. You know how the sound like...
It's the Doppler effect.
It's the Doppler effect. Redshift is the same thing with light as the Doppler effect is with sound.
So here it is for me with that, though, just to take that of the general idea that the universe is expanding and the further out you go, it's going faster.
Right.
Is that, one, we're observing the universe as if the Earth is the center of the universe, because everything we're observing is right here. So we're somehow making the assumption that everything started with us. If you're going to collapse all the way back to singularity, the Big Bang.
No, no, that's not it. But they are doing the math from our corner.
Yes.
From where we are, which, if you don't know that that's a problem, it is a problem.
Yeah.
It's a huge problem. Okay.
But also, then, if you're talking about billions of years of time,
right,
you're looking at light, then that is from different times.
Yes. So you're looking back into time.
But you're looking back into time, but then how do you then make sense of whether or not, because that's further redshifted, because it's further away, because it's further back in time, whether the things that are closer to us then would have also then showed redshift if we had also seen their light at the same point in time of when that time supposedly was.
Right.
So and I struggle with that because the what's the closest galaxy? The Andromeda.
Yeah.
It's actually blue shifting toward us. It's actually coming toward us.
Right, it's blue shifting because we're going to collide with it
Yes.
in like 5 billion years or something.
And so
you won't be here.
Yeah.
It's fine.
But does that mean that like even the galaxies that are really far away, if we were able to see the light that's more current, would they be blue shifting and coming toward us? We don't know because we can't see that light until if it's 13.8 billion years away from us. We won't see it for a really long period of time, and
there's in other words, what you're saying is that there's a problem even if time is not something that arises out of reality. Let's say time is constituent of reality, like atoms are.
Like let's just go with their assumptions about redshift and everything else. Yeah.
You still have a major problem because time is still relative.
And so what you're seeing from the really distant galaxies
Right.
from a different time than the Andromeda that's really close to us, how do we know that the kind of correlation that Hubble's making between distance, proportional distance and velocity is true at the same moments in time for the galaxies, even though they're at different times and distance?
Yeah.
I'm nerding out a little bit, but as I think about that, then it's like, well, I don't know. That doesn't make sense to me. And then that it just drives me to home of the fact that, like, well, I don't know how God did it, and I'm good with that. I don't need to know how He did it. I just need to know that He is God and I'm not. And
but what I'm saying though, like, and I know this is not what you're saying.
Yeah.
This is not what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
But what it could sound like is that you're arguing for God in the cracks and ignorance. Like God fits with whatever we don't know.
No, I'm not saying that. Good point. Yes.
That's how it could be taken,
Yep.
what you just said. And I know that's not what you're arguing because I know you well enough to know that's not what you believe.
Yeah.
But again, back to theologians when we're at our best, talking to physicists when they're at their best, what we want to say to them is not that God fits in the places where we're ignorant or we just don't know. God is in both what you think you know, and you're wrong about, but you're not going to know it for another 50 to 100 years. And God is in the stuff that you'll never know.
Yeah.
When we say in the Creed that we believe in the God who created everything, both the visible and invisible, there's a reason that it's phrased that way in the Creed. we believe in both the God who created everything we can be pretty darn sure about, and we're sure of the God who created everything that we'll never be truly sure about.
It makes me think about dark matter and dark energy, and that you look at the cosmic background radiation and the idea that the amount of mass in the universe doesn't match the calculations, so there must be matter that we can't see. There must be energy that we can't see, and
well, we can't see most of it. So
I know that's the
to again remind everyone of what we all should really know. When we say we see these things, we don't see these things. The instruments we're using see these things, because your eyeballs can only see like 6% of what exists. You're basically a mole. You didn't know it. You're basically blind as a bat. And we all are, which is why, again, when theologians at their best are speaking to physicists at their best, what we want to say to our brothers and sisters in that field, in that discipline, is be humble.
Yeah. Well, and to
remember to be humble.
And to maybe double down on what you were saying about how it could seem like what I might have been saying, or that I hopefully wasn't, is that I don't bring up the things about redshift or these gaps in the knowledge as if we as Christians should have somehow
just throw up our hands and say, well, God.
Or to think, well, you've got a bunch of holes in your theories, so that must mean that God exists.
Right, yeah.
That's not why we know God exists.
But we also, as Christians, don't throw up our hand. We need more Christians to go into physics departments. Can I just say that? If you are interested in math at all, even if you're not, a lot of physicists are not actually good at math. They hate the math, but they learn how to do it. If you're interested in this stuff at all, you should pray over whether or not you think God's leading you to study physics, because we need more Christians who are doing this math and doing this important work, because we don't just throw up our hands and say, well, God.
Yeah.
We say, because we know that God, now I'm going to go use the brain that God gave me in my head, and I'm going to go study this stuff.
How can I better understand the beauty of His creation?
How can I better understand? But here's where physicists are at their worst. When they say we get it or we understand or we know, that's when it becomes science as religion. It's science as magic is what I call it. It's like, well, we know that. No, you don't. You don't know anything. No, you don't.
Here's our best idea of how it might have happened.
Here's a working model, which is what I appreciate about Dr. Kaku. He said we may have to readjust our models. Yeah, I think you're probably going to have to. And he says model, not fact or something. Although it sounds like that when he says we'll have to rewrite the textbooks. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Because
you just saw something that doesn't fit.
So your model's wrong, and we're going to have to come up with a better. But see, there's always that on it in English. To better understand the universe that God created, to better understand the models that we use to make sense of it.
The work that Galileo did of understanding that it's a heliocentric, not Earth-centric solar system. That was better understanding of...
That was a better understanding...
God's creation.
Of understanding why things happen the way they happen on this planet. Yeah, absolutely. So it's a more useful... So I want to encourage anyone watching, if you are interested in this stuff, please go start studying, because we need you. The church needs you. The world needs you. Our society needs you to help us better understand the amazing universe that God has made.
And if you fell asleep because we talked cosmology, I'm sorry.
All right, we'll see you next time.